Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at drawing long fur. We're going to take a look at the actual technique involved with this one and not necessarily the colours used. If you want a particular colour of fur, then take a look at the playlist for this series and apply the technique to your chosen fur colour. But let's get straight into this one. You want to start off with your base layers, so your lightest colours. And we're going to start by gently shading these colours down and mapping in the general direction of the fur. Analyse your reference and decide on the direction, that's really important. And for long fur, it doesn't really matter how you shade, with long or short shading strokes. So use whatever feels natural, and you want to build a light, even tone going in your fur direction. The point of the base layers here isn't to add texture, but more for mapping out the directions and to give your further pencil layers a really solid base to sit upon. Add as many colours and layers as you feel you need for your base, for your chosen colour, and then move on to the next step, which is filling in the clumps of your fur and adding in the texture. The technique for long fur is pretty much the same technique as I covered in the first video to this series. You want to point your pencil down on your paper and gently lift the pencil as you work your way along the fur strand until you reach the end, and then you want to lift off completely so you have a nice tapered line. I showed the technique with quite short lines in my very first video, so for long fur all you need to do is elongate that line by keeping your pencil on the paper for longer before lifting, or by making a lot more of an exaggerated stroke with your wrist. Long fur tends to be quite dense, so you'll be adding a lot of these lines really close together to create a really thick texture. Now on to the clumps part, and what's that mean, Amy? Well, you want to look at the lights and the shadows within your fur and decipher the shapes that they're making. I'm not talking like perfect circles, squares or anything like that. These are going to be odd shapes and will really vary. For my demo, the shapes kind of remind me of teeth or an upside down flame. You don't want to think of the fur in terms of each individual hair strand. Thinking like that can really easily overwhelm you, and it's also going to take you forever to add everything in strand by strand. It'll also look quite stringy doing it that way as well. I find it easier to look at the shapes of both of the parts, so both the shadows and the lights, and then fill them in with a light pressure on your mid-tone pencil. So you want to keep the pressure light so you can erase any mistakes if you make them. Once you're happy with your clumps, go in with a harder pressure or a darker tone and start to fill them in by creating those long tapered lines, so we're really starting to build the texture. When creating these lines, I like to work both in the direction of the fur and backwards into the fur, so in the opposite direction, as I find that gives a much softer appearance and a much more natural look. You want to concentrate a lot of these lines in the shadows of the clumps and add a few lines here and there throughout the lighter sections so that you're adding a subtle texture all over the area. Depending on the texture of your long fur, whether it's that soft fluffy kind or a more rough variety, I like to blend every now and then with the base colours or a white pencil. My example is the fluffy kind, so every now and then I do a little bit of that blending to soften things up. If your fur is quite rough, then just skip that part and continue to add fur lines and build the depth of the fur by gradually introducing your darker colours. For the shadows on the long fur, sometimes you don't want to add a darker colour and have it creep into your lighter fur by adding in those fur lines, so by gently glazing or shading down a darker tone can work wonders, especially if your shadow has small, really dark areas but the rest of it is still kind of fairly light. This is a really good technique if you have any fur direction changes as well, and you have like that shadow directly underneath where the fur is changing direction, like my example does in the top left hand side. Gently shading or glazing into the shadows does the trick at conveying that. I'll be adding a tutorial in this series covering wavy fur where we'll talk about this in a lot more detail, so watch out for that. You want to keep building your layers and gradually getting darker and darker just by continuing with the same long fur lines until you're happy with the fur and your clumps are all nice and defined. If you're having trouble deciphering the clumps within your fur, I find that having a black and white reference photo really helps. It just helps you to decipher the values. It really amplifies the lights and the darks. If you don't want to turn your reference black and white, or you don't have the ability to, then just squinting at your reference photo really makes the lights and the darks pop out a lot more to you. So just squint or turn your photo black and white, and then you can define your clumps a lot easier. And that's pretty much it for rendering your long fur. It's just elongating that fur line, just creating that really long tapered line and grouping your fur lines together into the shadow areas and identifying and thinking of your fur in terms of clumps rather than individual strands. So it's quite a simple process. And as I said, I will be covering sort of long wavy fur and curly fur, where we'll talk about everything else and those sort of techniques in a lot more detail. But this is the basic technique for creating long fur, so that kind of long straight fur that you often find. I hope this tutorial has helped you, and if you want to check out the fur series tutorials in real time, then there are full videos available for my club puffins on my website and on Patreon. I'll pop the links and everything in the description for you guys. If you like this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up with that button below. Leave me a comment of what you'd like me to teach you guys in this fur series, and if you are new around here, why not hit subscribe and join my coloured pencil family here on YouTube. I upload every single Friday and throughout the week as well. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!